If you have ever prayed for immortality, stop and listen to me first. Immortality is not a crown. It is not glory. It is not a golden throne at the right hand of saints. It is an iron coffin that never opens. It is a war that does not end. It is a scream with no lungs, no throat, no air, and no mercy. That is what I was given. That is what they called an honor. So sit down and hear me properly, because I have had centuries to think, and all I have left is time. I had a name once. Give me a moment. It was there once, clear and solid, a thing I wore as easily as skin. I think it began with an L. No, even that is slipping away. It runs through my mind like water through fingers I no longer have, like light through eyes that have been gone longer than most men live. No matter. Names are luxuries for the living, and I am not entirely alive and not entirely dead. I am something caught between those states, something your language was never built to describe. I am a dreadnought, and I am going to tell you what that truly means. Not the polished lie recited by chaplains to rows of young battle brothers. Not the sacred little myth about eternal service and deathless honor. I will tell you the truth. My truth. The truth of what it means to be sealed inside an iron tomb for longer than memory can bear. I remember the day it began. Strange, is it not? Whole centuries have been stripped from me, faces erased, names shattered, victories and losses blurred together, but that day remains. It is burned into my mind like heated iron. Perhaps because it was the last day I was a man, or as much of a man as one of us can ever still claim to be. The world was called Ravenhold Tertia, or perhaps Tertia Ravenhold. Memory plays cruel games now. It was a gray planet, dusted in the ash of dead volcanoes. We were fighting chaos cultists in the ruins of an ancient city. A routine purge, nothing exceptional. We had done the same thing 100 times before. I was captain of the 3rd Company. I had behind me 47 years of active service, enough to be respected, not enough to become legend. I led my brothers through smoking streets, burning filth from stone with bolter and blade, and everything was going exactly according to plan until the world detonated around me. It was a plasma blast, or a hidden defense turret, or perhaps a weapon cloaked by warp trickery. The details are gone. The pain is not. I remember my armor, that sacred second skin, melting into my flesh. I remember my lungs filling with furnace heat. I remember bone cracking against a wall. I remember the smell most of all, burned meat, my own meat. I remember the sound of my scream collapsing into a wet animal rasp. And I remember the final thought that crossed my mind before the darkness swallowed me. At last I will see the Emperor. I was wrong. I was more wrong than I had ever been in battle, in faith, in life. The first thing I understood after the dark was pain, but not the clean, sharp pain of a wound. This was deeper than that, broader, more obscene. This was the pain of existence itself, the pain of being alive in the wrong shape. I tried to open my eyes, but there were no eyes. I tried to move my hand, but there was no hand. I tried to scream, but there were no vocal cords to make the sound. There was only darkness, perfect, total, endless darkness, and the awareness that I was trapped inside something narrow, wet, and wrong. I do not know how long I remained in that state. Minutes, hours, days. When you do not have a body, time loses its edges. There is only thought bouncing forever inside a skull that is no longer truly a skull. Then voices came, distant, muffled, distorted, indicators stabilizing, neural interface nominal, begin activation. Something clicked inside my mind, or rather something was connected to it. A flood of information hit me so violently that my consciousness almost drowned. And then I saw. Not with sight as I had once known it, but through data, through streams from optical sensors that my mutilated brain was desperately trying to interpret as vision. The colors were wrong. Reds too violent, blues too deep. Depth itself had become uncertain. Distance no longer felt honest. In front of me stood a tech marine. At first his face was only a blurred stain of color, then slowly, painfully, it sharpened as my mind learned its new prison. Behind him were workshop walls, tools, cables, flickering rune lights, the cold geometry of machines. "Ancient," he said, and his voice came to me through acoustic filters that made him sound mechanical, distant, almost inhuman. "Can you hear me?" I tried to answer. A burst of grinding static tore out of whatever now served as my mouth. Then words came, ugly and synthetic. What happened? My own voice, and not my voice at all. All the tone had been stripped from it, every trace of the man I had once been. I heard it from outside myself, like the speech of a stranger. The tech marine lowered his head. "It might have been reverence, it might have been pity. You were gravely wounded on Ravenhold Tertia, brother. The apothecaries did what they could, but the damage was too severe. The chapter chose to preserve you, to let you continue your service." Then he paused, and I already knew from the way he paused that the sentence would ruin me. "You were interred in a dreadnought." The word fell into my mind like a stone into still water. Each widening ring of understanding was worse than the last. Dreadnought, metal sarcophagus, eternal service, eternal confinement. No, I rasped through a voice that no longer belonged to me. No, that is impossible. I was supposed to die. I wanted to die. The tech marine stepped back. His face stayed neutral, but something moved in his eyes, something like fear or perhaps recognition. "It is a great honor, Ancient," he said, and the phrase sounded as hollow as the iron shell around me. "You will serve the chapter forever. Forever." The word echoed in me until it became a chamber of its own. Forever. At the time, I thought the first weeks were the worst. I did not yet understand that the worst thing about this fate is that it keeps finding new ways to deepen. Imagine trying to control a body that is not yours. No, that is too small. Imagine trying to control a building. Every thought of movement had to be translated into commands for systems never meant for the intimacy of human will. I would think of lifting an arm and discover there was no arm, only a power fist weighing as much as a small vehicle, driven by servos and hydraulics. The first time I tried to take a step, I nearly smashed down half the wall of the workshop. My leg, if such a column of metal and cable can still be called a leg, slammed into stone hard enough to shake the chamber. The tech marine scattered. One of the little mechanical attendants did not move quickly enough and disappeared under my weight. I did not feel his body crush. I only received a pressure notification informing me that some object had been beneath my foot. That was the first living thing I killed in my new form. By accident. Without even noticing. Calibration took weeks. Every day was a repetition of humiliations. Raise the arm, lower the arm, take one step, stop, turn. Simple things that my old body had done without thought now demanded total concentration. My brain clawed and adapted, growing new pathways to replace the ones that no longer led anywhere. And then there were the phantom sensations. Emperor preserve me, the phantom sensations. I felt hands that did not exist. I tried to clench fists that had long since been cut away. I felt an itch in legs that had rotted into disposal vats. For more than a month my mind refused to accept that the body was gone. It kept sending signals into nothing and waiting for answers that could never return. The worst of all was breathing. I did not breathe. The life support systems oxygenated what remained of my blood directly. But the brain remembered the rise of the chest, remembered air entering lungs, remembered the body rhythm that had once defined every living second. And every heartbeat, every cursed instant, part of me was suffocating. Not physically, psychologically. I was drowning without water, choking without pressure, dying without the mercy of death. They told me I floated in amniotic suspension fluid within the sarcophagus, thick, cold, chemical. I could not truly feel it. The nerves that might have carried those signals were gone or severed or made irrelevant. But my brain invented the sensation anyway, because the alternative was a hunger of the senses so profound that madness would have rushed in to fill it. After 6 weeks, I could walk without demolishing whatever stood nearby. After 2 months, I could fire the assault cannon without missing a target at 50 meters. After the 3rd month, I could use the power fist in close combat with enough control to crush an orc instead of the brother standing beside it. The tech marines were pleased. They said I adapted faster than most, that my mind was flexible, that I accepted my new reality with uncommon efficiency. They did not understand. Adaptation is not acceptance. I learned to operate the machine. I never accepted it. Every time I looked down through those false eyes and saw not hands but weapons, not legs but supports, not a body but a war engine, something inside me screamed. I wanted to tear the sarcophagus open from within. I wanted to claw my way out of the metal prison, but there was nothing with which to claw, nothing with which to strike. I was the prison. The prison was me. And then I learned the worst fact of all. The sarcophagus does not open from the inside. There is no switch within reach. No mercy lever. Even if I had wanted to end myself, and I did, with all the strength that remained in me, I could not. I had been locked into forever. They woke me for battle 4 months after my interment. By then I had learned how to exist in that state. Not live, exist. There is a difference. The enemy was approaching one of our chapter worlds, orcs, an enormous wog rolling through the system like a green tide. Command decided the new Dreadnought should be tested. They loaded me into a dropship. I remember the vibration of the hull as numbers fed through stabilizers, cold and abstract, more like a report screen than a physical sensation. I remember the voices of my brothers around me, distorted by acoustic processors until they were nearly unrecognizable. I remember trying and failing to attach names to them. The landing was brutal. Orc anti-air fire shook the craft all the way down. Around me the battle brothers checked weapons, prayed, prepared themselves. I simply stood. What else does a dreadnought do? Check its weapon. The weapon was part of me. Pray. By then I was no longer sure the Emperor listened to prayers rising from iron coffins. The ramp dropped and I saw the battlefield. In my old life, stepping into combat in power armor meant being struck by everything at once. The smell of propellant and blood, the heat of detonations, the tremor of artillery through the ground, the roar of brothers and enemies all collapsing into one overwhelming storm. Now it was different. The optical sensors gave me a clear and precise image, but without depth, without that physical sense of presence real sight provides. The acoustic sensors recorded sound and translated it into data. Explosion at 347 meters. Intensity 143 decibels. Likely source Orc rocket platform. Impact tremors became figures. The battle was visible, measurable, perfectly legible, and utterly unreal. I saw it. I did not feel it. The captain ordered me forward and I advanced. The first orcs entered my targeting solution seconds later. A mob of green bodies howling and swinging crude blades as they ran at death with that ecstatic idiocy peculiar to their breed. I thought of firing, and the neural link translated thought into command. The assault cannon roared, vomiting 20mm shells. Bodies burst apart. Flesh, bone, fragments, blood, all of it recorded with merciless clarity. In my old life, battle had been an ecstasy. Adrenaline in the blood, recoil in the arms. Pain from wounds, satisfaction in a perfect shot. Even agony had reminded you that you were alive. Now there was only efficiency. Target acquired, target destroyed, next target acquired, next target destroyed. Again and again, killing had become procedure. An orc knob charged me with a power claw. Once I would have felt the hit, the shock, the pain, the force of impact. Now the sensors merely reported. Contact. Armor compromised in Sector 7 Alpha. Structural integrity reduced by 3.7%. I struck back. The power fist turned him into pulp. Contact. Target neutralized. That was all. The battle lasted for hours. We won. The orc horde broke. Their warboss died. My brothers celebrated, striking one another on the shoulder plates, praising the Emperor, retelling their moments of courage while the dead were still warm. I stood among them like a tower and felt nothing. Victory had no taste. Comradeship gave no warmth. I was a weapon that had fulfilled its designed function, nothing more. One young brother came to me afterward, reverence shaking in his voice. Perhaps he had once been one of the scouts I trained. Perhaps not. Ancient, he said, it was an honor to fight beside you. Your valor inspires us. I wanted to tell him the truth. There is no valor here. There is only emptiness. There is only a machine doing what it was built to do. Do not envy me. Pray that you never become what I have become. But my synthesized voice delivered the approved lie. Service to the Emperor is the highest honor. Fulfill your duty, brother. He went away strengthened. I remained where I was, wondering whether the warrior I had once been had died on Ravenhold Tertia, and whether what lived now inside the iron shell was only his echo. After battle came stasis. They say it is necessary. They say the neural interface places too much burden on the mind, that without long intervals of suspension a dreadnought decays even faster than expected. They call stasis a mercy. They lie, or they do not understand, or they have chosen not to understand. Let me tell you what entering stasis feels like. The tech marines remove the sarcophagus from the chassis. I feel the systems shutting down, one after another. First the weapons, then locomotion, then the acoustic sensors, then the optics. With each one that goes dark, part of me disappears. Imagine someone cutting away your limbs without pain, only with absence. Suddenly where your arm was, there is nothing, then a leg, then the other arm, then hearing, then sight. In the end there is only consciousness, floating in black silence, without body and without world. Then the stasis field engages. They say it stops time, that I sleep unaware, that centuries pass outside me like an instant. This too is a lie. Stasis does not stop the mind. It slows it, stretches it. Where once there was a second, now there is an hour. Where once there was an hour, now there is a year. I no longer know how long a year becomes in stasis. I lost count so long ago that I forgot what counting itself feels like. In that elongated eternity I cling to memories the way a drowning man clings to wreckage. My childhood on my home world, my mother's face. No, not her face anymore. That is gone. But perhaps her voice. Or perhaps only what I wish her voice sounded like. Each time I return to the memory it changes a little, fades a little, becomes less trustworthy. I remember my first battle in power armor, fear and exaltation, blood, propellant, the face of an enemy just before death. But was it really like that, or has my mind begun rewriting history, patching holes with invention? Names vanish first, always names, then faces, then eventually even the fact that there had been faces. Between the remnants of memory there is only blankness, consuming and absolute. There are moments when even memory fails completely, when I have exhausted every image, every fantasy, every thread of thought my mind can produce. Then all that remains is bare awareness, the knowledge that I exist and nothing else. Philosophers once argued over the nature of hell. They pictured flame, sulfur, hooks, demons. They were children. True hell is absence. True hell is being locked in your own mind for centuries with no company but slowly rotting memories of a life you can no longer trust. In that darkness I scream. I do not know for how long. A second. A decade. The scream is soundless because I have no voice, but it echoes through what remains of me until it becomes part of my identity, until I forget there was ever a time before the scream. Waking from stasis is not like rising gently from sleep. It is a violent extraction from non-being, almost as traumatic as the original interment. First there is nothing, not darkness, not silence, not even awareness of self. Then a spark. An electrical impulse sent into the remains of my brain by the waking systems. It says wake, but I do not remember what waking means. I do not remember what I means. Then more impulses, more system activations, and suddenly consciousness returns all at once like lightning. I exist. I am me. I had a name. What was it? Where am I? Why is there no body? Why is there no light? Every single awakening brings panic. Every single cursed awakening. It is as if I die and am reborn into the iron coffin every time. Then the systems connect, optics, acoustics, locomotion, and the world crashes into me as a torrent of data too large and too fast. Colors smear. Sound becomes a wall, up and down lose meaning. Then a voice from outside anchors me. Slowly the world acquires form again. The face before me is not the same tech marine as before. It is younger, unknown. I ask how long I slept. There is a pause, too long, and then the answer. 47 years ancient. The chapter needs you again. 47 years. The words drop through me like stones into a bottomless shaft. 47 years reduced to one stretched night. 47 years in which generations of brothers were born, trained, fought, and died, while for me there had only been dark. I tried to remember the men I had last fought beside. Their names were gone. Their faces had become smudged silhouettes. I asked after Captain Severin, the commander I remembered. Was he still alive? The tech marine lowered his eyes and told me that Captain Severin had fallen at the Battle of Hellion Prime 32 years earlier, and that his name was carved on the Wall of Heroes in the chapter shrine. Of course he had died. They all die. Everyone dies except me. I asked who now commanded the company. Captain Draven, he said. He had been accepted into the chapter 15 years after your last awakening. I did not know him. I would fight beside him. Perhaps I would watch him die. No, not perhaps. Certainly. And then I would go back into stasis and wake half a century later to hear that his name too had been carved into some wall. That is the worst part of waking, not the confusion, not the panic, but the realization that the world has continued without you. All those you knew are dead, or old, or changed beyond recognition. You return as a ghost from another age, fight another war, vanish again, while the living continue having their brief, blazing lives. I asked for the tactical situation because that is what a dreadnought is meant to ask, because my private hell is irrelevant in the face of the enemy. The tech marine reported a Tyranid hive fleet approaching the system, all available forces mobilized. My strength required at the front. I inclined the hull in the old ritual gesture because form is what remains when meaning begins to rot. I am ready to serve, I said. The standard words, the proper words. But deep in the sarcophagus another question was already waiting, one I learned never to speak aloud. How many awakenings can a mind survive before there is nothing left inside the machine but the machine itself? I lost count of the years. I lost count of the campaigns. I lost count of the awakenings. Sometimes when the systems come online and the world assembles itself around me, I do not immediately understand who I am, not in the sense of forgetting my name. That had vanished long ago. It was lost somewhere between the 2nd century and the 4th. No, sometimes I forget that I was ever a man at all. They tell me it has been 327 years since my interment, or 328 or 400. The numbers no longer matter. They are too large, too abstract, too detached from feeling to mean anything real. In that time I have survived more chapter masters than I can properly sort. I remember some of them, or rather I remember fragments. Magister Solon, stern and just, slain against chaos. Magister Kalen, wise and careful, who died of age in his private chambers. Magister Varro, young and bright with fire, killed in his first truly great campaign. There were others. Their names have run together like wet paint. The same has happened to most battles. They have collapsed into one long river of violence, but a few remain distinct. I remember fighting Necrons on a dead world whose name I lost. We thought the planet empty. Then they rose from beneath the earth in endless ranks, metal skeletons with green fire where eyes should be. I fought for 12 hours without pause. My chassis was penetrated in 17 places. I destroyed hundreds, but they kept standing, kept repairing, kept coming. At one point I looked down at a Necron I had just shattered and saw myself. Another metal skeleton imprisoned in armor, unable to die, unable to rest, able only to fight without end. We were not so different, it and I. The only difference was that it did not remember what it had once been, and I did. I am not sure which of us was more fortunate. I remember another war against demons where the warp tore open and things spilled through that no mind should ever behold. They whispered to me, "Join us," they said. "We can free you from the prison. We can give you a new body. We can give you the death you crave." I knew it was a lie. Chaos never offers mercy, only more inventive shapes of suffering. And yet part of me wanted to accept. Part of me was willing to take any bargain, no matter how damned, if only it would break the iron box and let me out. I did not yield. Perhaps some scrap of faith remained. Perhaps only stubbornness. Perhaps fear that the alternative would be even worse. I fought until the breach closed and the last demon was driven back, but the voices never fully left. Sometimes in the depths of stasis, when my mind drifts in perfect dark, I still hear them, and sometimes I cannot tell whether they are demons at all, or only my own thoughts wearing a different mask. I remember the battle in which I killed one of my own brothers. When did it happen? 100 years ago, 200, we were fighting heretics on a cult world. The front shifted constantly. I opened fire on a cluster of enemies and one of them was not an enemy. My sensors processed the truth a fraction too late. Chapter colors, power armor, brother. 3 shells from the assault cannon tore through his torso before I could stop. After the battle, command investigated. The report cleared me. Tragic accident, fog of war, target confusion. No fault assigned to the ancient, but I knew the truth. The sensors were fine, the delay was in me. My mind no longer processed reality quickly enough. My reactions, once faster than thought, now lagged by fatal fractions. I was aging without a body, aging in the mind, in the soul, if any soul was left. I forgot his name. I forgot his face. The guilt remained. That is the other obscenity of this existence. Everything I want to keep vanishes. Everything I wish would fade stays forever. The good memories leak away. The bad ones corrode the walls of my mind and cling there like rust. The worst thing is not combat, it is not stasis. It is not even the disintegration of identity. The worst thing is watching everyone you know die. When I was first interred, there were still brothers in the 3rd Company whose names I could hold. Darian, my first lieutenant, a man with a contagious laugh and a will like steel. Lucan, sergeant of the 1st Squad, who never retreated even when retreat would have been wise. Aaron, a young brother I took under my wing and trained in the art of command. Darian died 12 years after my interment. An orc bullet, stupid, pointless, ordinary. I did not learn of it until my next waking, 40 years after his death. By then his grave had weathered. Lucan endured longer, 73 years. He rose to captain and led with the same stubborn courage I had once admired in him. He died covering the withdrawal of his men from a lost battle, a heroic death, a worthy death, a death I envied with a bitterness I could never express. Aaron lived longest. The scout I taught to hold a bolter rose all the way to chapter master. Imagine that. He ruled for 80 years. He woke me for the great wars, and each time I watched him age. First the fine lines around the eyes, then gray in the hair, then the slight bend in the back, then the slowing of movement. He died in bed with honor guards around him and a prayer to the emperor on his lips. I stood over the coffin at his funeral, towering above the mourners, unable to weep because I had no tear glands, unable to kneel because my legs could not bend that way, unable to touch his hand in farewell because my hands were a power fist and an assault cannon. That is another loss no one speaks of, the loss of the world as sensation. People imagine that becoming more machine means sharper sight, keener hearing, greater awareness. Technically that is true. My sensors distinguish millions of shades, far more than any human eye, but I do not experience them as color. I experience them as categories. Red is not warm, bright, or dangerous. Red is a specific wavelength range, nothing more. I remember the sky of my home world. Blue, vast, with clouds that looked like ships crossing an ocean of air. I remember looking up at it as a child and feeling something, or perhaps, peace perhaps, connection perhaps. Now when I look at any sky on any world I see atmospheric composition, cloud density, precipitation probability. Endless data, empty data. The same is true of sound. My acoustic sensors catch frequencies from 0.1 Hz to 100 kHz. I hear ultrasonic bat cries and infrasonic tremors from tectonic plates, but music has become a sequence of wave patterns. The voices of brothers are audio streams requiring decipherment. Only rarely does something break through the wall of numbers. The sound of a chapter hymn I knew in life. The sight of a company banner whipping in the wind. For a fraction of a second the data becomes experience again, reality returns and then it slips away. Those moments are growing rarer. I fear the day they vanish entirely, when the world becomes nothing but figures and signals, and my mind finally loses the ability to turn information into life. Perhaps that is the true death of a dreadnought. In stasis I speak with the dead, not literally. I do not believe in ghosts, not even after all I have seen in the warp. But when consciousness drifts in the stretched dark, the mind creates companions from what remains. Darian comes most often. I no longer remember his face, but I remember or think I remember his voice. In the darkness he sits beside me, though beside has no meaning there, and we repeat the same conversation for years of subjective time. You are still here, he says. Yes, I answer. It is not fair, he says. Yes, I answer. You deserve rest, he says. Yes, I answer. Over and over until I begin to suspect that the whole dialogue is only the part of me that still dares to tell the truth wearing Darien as a mask. Aaron comes too, always young in memory, not the old master he became. Teacher, he says, I prayed for you every day. I know, I answer. But the emperor never answered, he says. No, I answer, he did not. Sometimes in that witnessless dark I allow thoughts that would be heresy in any waking hour. Perhaps the emperor does not hear prayers rising from iron coffins. Perhaps our souls already belong too much to the machine for prayer to pass cleanly through neural interfaces and amniotic fluid. Perhaps we are already dead in his sight. Or perhaps he hears and remains silent because he still needs us here, sealed in iron, paying for mankind with our endless suffering. Once I would have called that a noble sacrifice. Now I am only tired. Sometimes other voices come. Brothers whose names are gone, enemies I killed. My mother, though her face has dissolved so completely that only the shape of tenderness remains. My boy, she says, perhaps in a voice that never truly existed. My poor boy, I do not cry, I cannot. But something in the deepest chamber of what is left of me contracts in a way that pain once did. Forgive me, I whisper into the dark. Forgive me for not coming back. No one answers. The dead are always silent when you truly need an answer. In the waking intervals, the tech marines sometimes tell stories. They think I find them interesting. Machine kinship, perhaps, professional curiosity. They do not understand that each story is another nightmare to carry into stasis. They tell me of hellbrutes, dreadnoughts in service to chaos. Those things are what I might become. Traitors do not have our technologies. After the great betrayal, when the renegades fled into the Black Maw, they lost access to the old knowledge of the Red Forge, stasis chambers, neural stabilization systems, the frail little protocols of psychological mercy. All of that remained with the loyal empire. What does that mean for a Chaos Marine interred in a war coffin? It means there is no stasis between battles, no rest, no counterfeit of sleep. Imagine my fate made 1,000 times worse. Imagine remaining fully conscious in the dark for months, for years, for decades, while the sensors are powered down to preserve energy. No sight, no sound, no movement, only thought. The human mind is not built for that. Even the altered mind of a space marine breaks under endless sensory deprivation. First come hallucinations, then paranoia, then rage so complete that it devours everything else. And then the warp arrives. In the Black Maw, the barrier between reality and the immaterium thins. A mind weakened by madness becomes a beacon for demons. They whisper, promise release, offer power, and the shattered pilot inside the sarcophagus accepts. Mutation begins slowly and hideously. The flesh inside fuses with metal. Cables grow through muscle. Armor swells into organic shapes, spikes, tentacles, impossible limbs. In the end, there is nothing left of the noble war machine or the warrior who once inhabited it, only a beast of iron and hate. They keep hellbrutes chained between battles not out of respect, but out of fear, because they attack anything that moves, enemies, allies, masters. It does not matter. Sometimes I think about the warrior trapped somewhere inside such a creature. Does he know what he has become? Does some spark still look out through the madness and recoil in horror? Or is insanity itself a mercy? I do not know, and I am afraid to know, because in the deepest parts of stasis, when the dark presses closest, I sometimes feel something brush against my thoughts from beyond the edge of reality. Voices offering freedom, strength, an end to pain. I reject them every time. But every time it is a little harder. Every time the offer sounds a little sweeter. I fear the day my will finally cracks. The tech marines have a name for what long service does to us. They call it war echo, the condition where a dreadnought lives through so many battles that they collapse into one endless war stretched across the centuries. I did not recognize it at first. The signs were small. I called living brothers by the names of the dead. I confused planets. I asked about events a century old as if they had happened yesterday. Then it worsened. Once, in the middle of battle against Tyranids, I froze. The systems were functioning perfectly. Orders came in. The enemy was directly ahead, but I could not move because I did not know where I was. In my mind, I had returned to Ravenhold Tertia, to the final battle before interment. I saw chaos cultists instead of Tyranids. I heard the voices of brothers dead for 300 years. Something in my mind even mimicked the sensation of the plasma burn in my chest. Then a Tyranid struck me and the claws screeched across my armor, and the present snapped back into place. After the battle, a captain, whose name is gone already, asked whether I was all right. How do you explain to a man who has lived only a handful of decades what it means to carry centuries of war inside your skull? I lied and blamed a momentary optics failure. He did not believe me. He could not do anything else. Since then, the episodes come more often. Sometimes I lose the thread of a conversation because my mind has wandered onto some ancient battlefield. Sometimes in stasis, I cannot tell memory from hallucination. Sometimes on waking, I do not know which century I am in. I fought orcs on Ashreach. Or was it Azurmark? Or perhaps I was never on either world, and the memory belongs to another dreadnought leaking through the shared neural rights of the chapter. I remember seeing a Primarch, or perhaps I dreamed it. Our chapter was founded in the second founding. The last loyal Primarch vanished long ages before I was born, and yet the memory exists, a towering figure in golden armor, a voice that shook walls. Where did it come from? I remember my own death, my true death, not the interment, the plasma charge striking my chest, the smell of burned flesh. The final thought, at last I will see the Emperor, but I did not die. Or perhaps I did. Perhaps everything after that, the sarcophagus, the centuries of service, the endless wars, is merely the dying delirium of a ruined brain still lying on Ravenhold Tertia while the body burns out around it. The thought should terrify me. Instead, it comforts me. If all of this is a death dream, then one day it must end. If it is real, then peace may never come. I asked for death only once. Only once. It was 100 years ago, or 200, after a catastrophic campaign in which my hull was damaged so badly that the Tech Marines had to replace most of the systems. The protocols required that I remain conscious during the work for proper calibration. I watched them dismantle me, remove the shattered armor, expose the sarcophagus beneath, inspect the life support tubes and wires that kept me balanced between life and death. At one point, the Master Tech Marine leaned over my open coffin to check the readouts, and I said, "Shut me down." He froze. He looked at the sensor lenses that served as my eyes with an expression I did not understand at first. Then I realized it was horror. "Ancient," he said. "Shut me down," I repeated. "End my existence. Let me die." The silence that followed was longer than many men live. Then he stepped back as though I were contagious. "I cannot do that, Ancient," he said. "It would be impossible." "Why?" I asked. "Because you are a holy relic," he said. "A living history. Your wisdom, I cut in. What wisdom? I forget half of what I have seen. I confuse battles separated by centuries. I speak with the dead in stasis. What use am I?" He shook his head and told me that whether or not any of that was true, he had no authority. The chapter would not allow it. "The chapter," I said, and even through the flat monotone of the synthesizer the bitterness came through. "The chapter does not keep me alive for wisdom. The chapter keeps me alive because I am a weapon, because the hull is too valuable to leave empty, because forging a new dreadnought is almost impossible and I am already here, already functioning, already reusable. There was nothing else worth saying, that I suffered. Suffering is part of service, that I wanted rest. Rest is for the dead, and technically I still breathe by machine. That I was tired. Fatigue is no excuse for ending duty." The Tech Marine answered very softly. "I am sorry, Ancient, truly, but no one can help you." He went back to work. I never raised the subject again. What was the point? My words could not change the fact that the chapter would never permit a valuable asset to cease existing while it could still fight. I still wonder whether he reported the conversation. Perhaps there is some sealed notation in an archive somewhere. Dreadnought exhibits signs of psychological degradation. Observation recommended. Or perhaps he convinced himself I was only distressed from battle damage and forgot. It does not matter. From that day onward I stopped asking. Not because I stopped wanting death, but because I understood that wanting it was irrelevant. After that refusal, I began seeking death another way. Not openly. That would have been detected and prevented. I was subtle. I chose more dangerous positions. I delayed half a second too long under enemy fire. I found myself by accident in the path of armored columns. I accepted blows I could have avoided. I never wanted my end to cost the lives of my brothers, so I chose moments when a mishap would not compromise the battle line, when victory was already secure, when my destruction would appear merely unfortunate. But every time something failed, the shell that should have pierced the sarcophagus struck a less vital section of the hull. The enemy capable of killing me died a second earlier under friendly fire. Damage I hoped would be fatal proved reparable. Eventually I understood that it was not bad luck. Dreadnoughts are built too well. The sarcophagus is designed to survive almost everything. The life systems are redundantly layered. The armor is thicker than that of many tanks. Even if the outer chassis is completely destroyed, the coffin often remains intact, ready to be mounted inside a new frame. There is irony for you. I was built to be impossible to kill, and so now that I desire death more than anything, my own construction denies it. Some dreadnoughts do succeed. I knew one. He said openly, I seek a worthy death. He found it against chaos, charging alone into the thickest mass of enemies. They tore him apart in minutes. The chapter mourned him as a hero. The chaplains praised his sacrifice. No one suspected, or no one wished to suspect, that it was suicide dressed in acceptable language. Perhaps one day I will find my own such moment. Until then I continue. I continue to exist. I continue to fight. I continue to hope that the next battle will be the last. It is a strange kind of hope, hope for an ending, hope for non-being, but it is the only hope left to me. I do not know how much longer I have, not in the sense of systems. The life support could keep me going for millennia more. I mean how much of me remains. Each awakening takes something. Names blur, faces dissolve. Memories that were once sharp and radiant become pale shadows and then vanish altogether. I no longer remember the name my mother gave me, the name my brothers used before the iron coffin replaced it with ancient. I do not remember my face. What color were my eyes? Did I have some scar I once thought important? I do not remember my home world except as a fact, a line of data that says it once existed. Somewhere in the galaxy there is a planet where I was born, where I lived the first years of my life. Its name is gone, its sky is gone, its smell is gone. When the last memory disappears, what will remain? A machine that still functions, a dreadnought that fights and obeys. But inside the sarcophagus, what then? Emptiness, an automaton unaware of itself, or something worse, a ghost of consciousness that knows it used to be someone and cannot remember who. Sometimes I think that this has already happened, that the warrior who lay on Ravenhold Tertia with a burned-out chest died there completely, and what has spoken to you since is only an echo, a recording, a pattern of neural activity convincing itself it is a person. If that is true, then perhaps I do not deserve pity. Perhaps I am not a suffering man at all. Perhaps I am a machine that thinks it suffers. But tell me, what difference is there if the pain is still real from the inside? That is what I want you to understand. You who still live in bodies that can be held and lost. You who see the world with real eyes and hear it with real ears. You who one day will die and be released from the burden of being. Cherish that. Cherish every breath that fills your lungs, every touch your skin can feel, every smell, every taste, every ordinary sound that reaches a mind through organs built for life rather than through filtered machinery. Cherish even the simple fact that your existence will end. Death is not only a curse, it is also a gift. It gives shape to each moment by promising that the moment will not last forever. I was denied that gift. I was saved from death without ever being asked whether I wished to be saved. They call this fate the greatest honor a warrior can earn. They lie. It is not honor. It is a curse wrapped in liturgy. It is torture sanctified by tradition. It is hell presented as paradise by an empire that feeds on sacrifice and has forgotten how to distinguish devotion from cruelty. If you ever see a dreadnought on a battlefield, in a parade, in the shrine halls of a chapter fortress, remember what I have told you. Remember that inside that armored shell is what was once a man, or at least what came closest to manhood in a life of war. Remember the centuries of darkness he endured. Remember the memories he lost. Remember the dreams he no longer dreams, the peace he will never find. And if somewhere in your heart you feel the urge to pray for him, then pray not for more glory, not for longer service, not for one more victory in a war that will outlive stars. Pray for what he cannot ask for openly. Pray for death. I do not know whether anyone will hear these words. I do not know whether some chronicler will record them or whether they will remain only an echo inside a mind that is slowly coming apart. But if you hear me, whoever you are, wherever you are, in whatever millennium you live, know this. I was here. I lived. I fought. I suffered. I remembered for as long as remembering was possible. My name was, no, it is gone like everything else. All that remains is this, a voice from an iron coffin, the story of a creature that was once a man. They say only in death does duty end. For me, duty will never end.